5 different engine families, 1 nearly identical failure, and more than 1 million trucks and SUVs in the United States now sitting under either a federal recall or an open federal investigation because of it. That is what this is, and over the next half hour I'm going to walk you through every one of them, show you exactly what breaks inside, and hand you the 90-second check that tells you tonight whether the one in your driveway is on a list. Start with the number in the title, because I want to be straight with you before I ask you for anything else. 1 million failures is not what has happened. 1 million plus vehicles under recall or under investigation for engine failure, that is what has happened, and the two are not the same thing. The documented failures across these 5 engine families run into the tens of thousands. In one campaign alone, the manufacturer told the government it already knew about more than 28,000 field complaints and incidents before the recall was even filed. So the real number is smaller than the headline and still large enough to be one of the worst engine reliability stretches the American market has seen in 40 years. I'd rather give you the accurate version and have you trust the rest of it. Here's what makes this genuinely strange. 5 different companies. Pushrod V8, twin-turbo V6, naturally aspirated V6, 3-cylinder turbo. Different plants, different countries, different engineering philosophies. And in 4 of the 5, the part that failed is the same part. Not the same category of part, the same part, doing the same job, failing the same way, for reasons the companies themselves have described in almost identical language. I've had a lot of these apart. I've plastic aged more crank journals than I care to add up, and I've dropped enough oil pans to know the exact feeling in your stomach when the drain plug comes out with glitter on the magnet. So when I tell you this crisis comes down to one component and about 1/1000th of an inch of oil, I'm not simplifying it for television. That's the whole story. 3 things I'll flag now and pay off later, so you know they're coming. On the second engine, the manufacturer built a listening test, a way to decide whether your engine gets replaced or sent back out the door without ever opening it up. On the fourth, the official federal remedy for a mechanical bearing failure is a software update, and I'm going to defend that one because it's cleverer than it sounds. And somewhere in the first section, I'm going to tell you about a brand new 2026 SUV that seized at 1,600 miles, 3 model years after the defect was supposedly fixed. Foundation first, because none of the rest of it means anything without this. Most people hear engine failure and think about neglect. Skipped oil changes, cooked it towing, ran it low. That instinct is usually right. It is completely wrong here, and holding on to it will cost you money because these failures happen to careful owners. On schedule, under warranty, at mileages where nothing should be wearing out at all. One of them turned up on a teardown bench with 4 miles on the odometer. 4. So here's what's actually going on inside. Your crankshaft spins inside a set of bearings, soft, thin, curved shells, about the size and shape of a shirt cuff cut in half. Rod bearings where the connecting rods clamp on, main bearings where the crank sits in the block. And here's the part almost nobody outside the trade knows. The crankshaft never touches those bearings, not at idle, not at redline, not ever if the engine is healthy. The oil pump pushes pressurized oil into the gap, the spinning journal drags that oil into a wedge, and the crank rides up on top of the wedge and floats. Metal-to-metal contact is 0. The gap it floats across is somewhere around 1 to 2/1000ths of an inch. Call it a quarter, the thickness of a hair off your head. The technical name for that is hydrodynamic lubrication, and now you can put the phrase back in the drawer, because the useful way to picture it is a tire hydroplaning. When you hit standing water at speed, your tread stops touching the road and starts riding on a film of water it can't shove out of the way in time. That's a failure when it happens to your tires. A crankshaft does it on purpose, continuously, for 200,000 miles, and the entire design of the bottom end is a machine for keeping that film intact. Now, what breaks a film that thin? Something in the oil that is thicker than the film. That's it. That's the crisis. A hard particle left behind from machining. Swarf, sediment. The stuff the guys in the engine shops call glitter, gets carried by the pump into that gap. It's bigger than the clearance, so it can't pass through. It embeds itself in the soft bearing overlay, sticks out, and starts cutting a groove in a hardened steel journal that was polished to a mirror. The groove wrecks the wedge. Without the wedge, you get contact, contact makes heat, heat kills what's left of the film, and inside a few seconds to a few thousand miles, you get a knock, then a seizure, or the rod lets go and comes out through the side of the block. The federal filings use exactly that phrase, breaching of the engine block by the connecting rod. The other way to break it is dimensional. Grind a crank pin slightly out of round or leave the wrong surface finish on it, and you've narrowed or distorted the gap the film has to live in. The oil never gets its wedge in the first place. Same ending. This is why the old hands in engine building are absolute fanatics about clean, in a way that looks like superstition until you understand the numbers. Hot water, dish soap, rifle brushes down every oil gallery, 3 washes, dry it with compressed air, then oil every surface before a speck of dust can land on it. Every builder I've ever respected treats a new block as dirty until proven otherwise. Turns out that habit wasn't ritual. It was the whole job all along, and 5 very large companies have just relearned it in public. Let's go through them. By the way, if you drive an SUV and want to keep it reliable for hundreds of thousands of miles without wasting money at the repair shop, I put together a guide called the 500K Mile Car Care Bible. It covers 101 habits that can help your SUV last longer, the warning signs you should never ignore, and how to spot mechanic upsells that quietly drain your wallet. To get your copy, just scan the QR code on screen with your phone's camera or grab it from the first pinned comment below. Number 1, and the biggest by a mile, General Motors 6.2-liter V8, the L87, Tahoe, Suburban, Yukon and Yukon XL, Escalade, Silverado and Sierra 1500. 420 horsepower, aluminum block built at Tonawanda in Buffalo. In April of 2025, GM filed recall 25V274 covering just under 600,000 vehicles in the US, model years 2021 through 2024, around 720,000 worldwide. Read GM's own report and it names 2 root causes, both attributed to supplier manufacturing and quality problems. 1. Rod bearing damage from sediment on the connecting rods and in the crankshaft oil galleries. 2. Out-of-specification crankshaft dimensions and surface finish, debris and geometry. Exactly the 2 failure modes I just described in the manufacturer's own words. Then it got worse in 2 directions at once. In October of last year, the agency upgraded its investigation to an engineering analysis because it had by then logged over 1,100 reports of bearing failure. And a chunk of those were in vehicles built outside the recall window entirely. Model year 2019, 2020, and 2025 trucks running what is technically the same engine were never included. Later filings put the total incident count in that population north of 3,000. And in the other direction, in January of this year, the agency opened a recall query, a formal audit asking whether GM's fix works at all. That one started with 36 complaints from owners whose engines blew up after the dealer had already performed the remedy. By the middle of February, when the agency sent GM its information request letter, the number in that letter was 139, there's your 2026 model by the way, an owner reporting a brand new Denali Ultimate that seized at 1,600 miles. One more thing owners keep learning the hard way. When an engine does get replaced under this campaign, it isn't necessarily a new engine. GM has confirmed some are remanufactured, and the special coverage that came with the recall, 10 years or 150,000 miles from the in-service date, transferable, no deductible, is real, and it's better than nothing, and I'll come back to what it very deliberately does not cover. That's the one with the most vehicles. The next one has the most honesty and the strangest fix I've seen in years. Number 2, Toyota's V35A, the twin-turbo 3.4-liter V6 that replaced the old 5.7 V8 when the Tundra was redesigned for 2022. Same engine in the Lexus LX and in the 2024 Lexus GX. Same mechanism described by Toyota in language you could almost paste in from the GM filing, machining debris left inside the engine during production migrating to the number 1 main bearing. The timeline is 3 recalls for 1 problem. May 2024, about 102,000 vehicles, and Toyota's answer was blunt and expensive. Replace the engine, not inspect it, replace it. November 2025 added roughly another 126,000, including the Lexus GX. May of this year added about 44,000 more 2024 Tundras, call it 270,000 vehicles, and over 70,000 engines already physically swapped out. Toyota changed the number 1 main bearing design in production in July of 2024, and engines built after that aren't in any recall population. Here's the listening test I promised you. Replacing 250,000 engines is a catastrophic amount of money, so Toyota developed a way to assess that bearing without pulling the engine apart. Dealers run inspection software that evaluates the number one main bearing and pulls stored drive data off the truck, and if the software can't confirm the bearing will stay free of abnormal wear, you get a new engine. Press coverage has described this as a resonant frequency test, essentially listening to what the bottom end sounds like and comparing it against known bad signatures. I'll be honest that I can't reconcile those two descriptions perfectly. The federal filing describes software plus drive data, the press describes a frequency method, and they may be the same thing at different levels of detail. I'm going with the filing. If you know more about that procedure than I do, I genuinely want to hear it. What I will say is that owners in the newer waves are in an ugly spot, and Toyota has been unusually upfront about it. When those recalls were filed, the remedy was still under development. Interim letters went out in December telling owners there's a safety risk and a fix is coming, with the final remedy anticipated around July or August of 2026, which is to say right about now. That means a lot of people have spent the better part of this year driving a vehicle the manufacturer has formally told the federal government might fail, with no appointment on the calendar. You're still with me, which means you care about this more than average, so let me ask for the one thing that keeps this channel going. Subscribe. That's it. Because the next two get almost no coverage, and the fourth one has a defect rate of 100%, not 0.6%, not a handful of complaints. 100% of the recalled vehicles are expected to have it. Number 3. Honda's 3.5-liter V6, the J35. Pilot, Odyssey, Ridgeline, Acura MDX, Acura TLX. Model years roughly 2016 through 2020. In November of 2023, Honda recalled just under 249,000 of them, and the cause was pure geometry. The equipment that grinds the crank pins was set up wrong, so the pins came out crowned, convex instead of round. Wrong shape, no proper oil wedge, rod bearing wears, seizes, engine dies. Honda had 1,450 warranty claims on the books when it filed. Now here's where Honda's story stops looking like the others and starts looking worse. Owners of cars outside that recall kept losing engines. The agency opened a recall query covering the whole population, just over 1,400,000 vehicles, to figure out whether the recall was drawn too narrowly. That inquiry ran 9 months and closed in August of last year without forcing Honda to do anything further, and on the very same day it closed, the agency opened a fresh investigation into the same engines over the same failure. The incident counts here depend on which document you read. The closing resume on the first inquiry tallied just under 3,000 incidents with 6 crashes or fires. Reporting on the second put it a little over 3,000 with 7. I'll take the lower number, it doesn't change anything. But this is the part I want you to sit with, because it's the most unsettling sentence in any of these filings. The agency stated that the failures in vehicles outside the recall do not appear to be caused by the same crankshaft manufacturing defect that the recall addressed. Read that again. Same engine, same bearing, same catastrophic ending. Different cause, and as of right now, nobody has publicly said what that cause is. I could give you 3 plausible theories, and they'd all be guesses dressed up as expertise, so I'm not going to. What I'll tell you is that when a regulator writes, "It isn't the thing we already know about," that is the most expensive sentence in the automotive business, and it's still sitting there unanswered. Notice what's happened across these 3. Not one of them is a design failure. Nobody drew a bad bearing. The crisis is manufacturing. Cleanliness and dimensional control, the 2 least glamorous things in the entire industry, the 2 things you cannot fix with software or a press release. And notice the escalation, because from here it gets less clear, not more. GM knows what broke, Toyota knows what broke, Honda, on the biggest slice of its own population, does not. Number 4, the Nissan Rogue's 1.5-liter 3-cylinder VC turbo. Best-selling Nissan in the country and the most technically ambitious small engine anybody sells, it physically varies its own compression ratio with a linkage under the crankshaft. Nissan recalled more than 440,000 Rogues, Altimas, and Infinitus in June of 2020 over bearing manufacturing defects. Then in February of this year, it filed 2 more recalls on the same day for the Rogue alone, covering a combined 642,000 vehicles, model years 2023 through 2025. Some owners are in both. The first of the 2 is a bearing recall again, but the mechanism is different and worth understanding. Nissan's finding was that under certain conditions, engine oil temperatures climb high enough to degrade the oil's lubricity, the oil gets too thin and too cooked to hold the film, and then the bearing seizes. In rare cases, the failure breaches the block and dumps hot oil, which is a fire risk. 690 warranty claims. And the remedy is a reprogram of the engine control module, plus a test drive and an inspection of the oil pan for metal debris, with an engine repair or replacement if they find any. I know how a software fix for a bearing sounds, but think about what the computer actually controls. Boost, timing, load, fueling, the cooling fan, the thermostat, and on many modern engines, the oil pump itself. If your failure mode is oil temperature under specific conditions, then changing the calibration so those conditions stop occurring is a legitimate engineering repair, not a dodge. Whether Nissan's particular calibration does the job, I can't tell you. I haven't seen it, and nobody outside Nissan has. That's my read on the approach, not a verdict on the outcome. The second recall is the one that ought to be getting the attention. Gears inside the electronic throttle body assembly can fracture, and when they do, the vehicle may not go forward or backward at all. Nissan's own estimate is that 100% of the vehicles in that recall have the defect. Compare that to the bearing recall, where the estimate is around 0.6%. If you own a 2024 or 2025 Rogue, the throttle body is the near certainty and the bearing is the lottery ticket, and almost every article I read had those two backwards. Number 5 is the short one, and it's here to make a point rather than to scare anybody. Ford March of this year, just under 48,000 2025 model year vehicles. Explorer, Bronco, Bronco Sport, Escape, Maverick, Ranger, Mustang, Edge, and the Lincoln Nautilus and Corsair. Anything with the 1.5, 2.0, or 2.3 EcoBoost. The exhaust gas recirculation valve can lose its poppet head. Root cause: inconsistent laser weld penetration at one joint at a supplier in South Korea. Ford found it because 5 warranty claims came in on vehicles with under 6,000 miles, all from outside North America. The remedy was still under development when the recall was filed. Not a bearing, not oil. One weld on one small part, done inconsistently. And the consequence is the same consequence as everything else on this list: loss of motive power. That's why it belongs here. The disease isn't rod bearings. The disease is that the part was correct on paper and wrong in the box. So why now? Why 5 companies at once? Let me give you the honest version, weighted properly. First, oil got thinner. American manufacturers spec 0W20 and lighter partly to hit corporate fuel economy targets, and you can verify that yourself in the most direct way possible. The same engine sold in another market often carries a heavier grade in its owner's manual. Thin oil is not automatically bad. Engines are designed around it, and it genuinely reduces friction and cold start wear. What it does is remove margin. A thinner film has less room to swallow a particle before that particle bridges the gap, which matters enormously if there are particles. Second, the bottom end of a modern V8 lives a stranger life than the one your dad worked on. Cylinder deactivation, shutting half the engine off and waking it back up. Automatic start-stop. 2-stage oil pumps that deliberately run lower pressure to save fuel. Direct injection. Every one of those is defensible on its own, and together they mean the bearings see load and pressure cycles no engine from the 80s ever experienced. Third, and this is the one that actually explains the pattern. As tolerances got tighter, cleanliness stopped being good practice and became the entire ballgame. Debris that a big clearance iron engine from 1975 would have chewed up and passed harmlessly out to the filter now spans the whole oil film. The engines didn't get more fragile. The margin for a dirty assembly line went to 0, and the assembly lines didn't all notice. And if you want evidence the industry knows exactly this, look at what GM is doing for 2027. The 6.2 and the 5.3 are being replaced by a new small block family, a 5.7 and a 6.6, with something like $2 billion going into the Flint, Tonawanda, and St. Catharines plants. And in the reporting on that program, there's a detail that tells you everything. Critical parts and processes are being pulled back in-house, away from outside suppliers, specifically to get tighter oversight of manufacturing consistency. That is a company writing a very expensive apology in the form of a capital expenditure. Now the part that should make you angry, and I want to be careful to make you angry about the right thing. Somebody looked at a defect in your crankshaft and offered you an oil change. That's not a rhetorical flourish. Go read GM's recall report. 2 root causes, in GM's own words: sediment causing rod bearing damage and out-of-specification crankshaft dimensions and surface finish. Neither of those is an oil problem. You cannot pour anything into an engine that makes a crank journal round again or that removes machining debris already embedded in a bearing shell. Those are hardware conditions. They live in metal. And the remedy you were handed if your engine passed the dealer inspection was this. Drain the 0W20, fill it with 0W40, install a new oil filler cap with the new number printed on it, and here's a warranty letter. A cap. For a crankshaft that might be out of specification. Do the arithmetic with me because the arithmetic is the accusation and I barely have to add anything to it. Replacing an engine in a full-size SUV is thousands of dollars in parts and a couple of days of a technician's life. Multiply by 600,000 vehicles. Now price a drain and fill with a filter and a plastic cap. The gap between those two numbers is one of the largest sums of money in the history of American warranty administration. And the inspection that decides which of the two you receive is performed by the party that pays for it, using criteria that party wrote on a vehicle you have to leave with them. 9 months later, the federal government opened a formal audit of that fix. It started with 36 owners whose engines died after the remedy. Within a month, the letter to GM listed 139 reports. And critically, this is the detail that closes the argument, the complaints spanned both paths, not just the oil change. The engine replacements too. Then there's the warranty, and I want you to look at it properly rather than gratefully. 10 years, 150,000 miles, transferable, no deductible. That is genuinely more than they had to do. It also covers precisely one thing, the engine failing. It does not cover what the recall did to the value of your truck. It does not cover the 6 weeks you spent in a loaner, or the trade-in number the dealer quoted you after typing your VIN in and going quiet. And the window to get reimbursed for repairs you already paid for out of your own pocket closed on the 31st of May this year. If you paid for one of these engines yourself and didn't know that deadline existed, nobody was obligated to find you. Here's what you get out of knowing this. From now on, when a remedy for a hardware defect shows up as a fluid, a filler cap, or a calibration, you know what you're looking at, and you know the exact question to ask. What did the inspection actually measure, and can I have that result written on the repair order? Ask that in a service lane and watch what happens. Let me back up to something larger for a minute, because there's a reason I find this story more interesting than depressing. The rod bearing is the most quietly remarkable part in the entire machine. It's the one component designed never to touch anything. Its whole existence is dedicated to maintaining a gap, a film of oil a fraction of a hair thick, holding 400 horsepower off a steel journal 50 times a second for 200,000 miles. When it works, and it almost always works, nobody thinks about it once. The best engineering in your life is invisible to you, and you only find out it was there when it stops. And here's what these 5 companies just proved at spectacular expense. You don't get to skip the boring part. Not with better CAD, not with tighter tolerances, not with a supply chain audit and a certificate. Every builder who ever taught anybody anything in this trade said the same thing in the same slightly irritated tone while scrubbing out a gallery with a rifle brush. Clean is not a step, clean is the job. That knowledge got passed hand to hand for a century because it was earned the hard way, and it doesn't stop being true just because the drawing has more decimal places on it. That's yours now too. Once you understand what one bearing does, you can read any recall notice in the world and tell in 90 seconds whether the proposed fix touches the actual cause. That's not trivia, that's judgment, and judgment is the only thing in this business that appreciates. So here's what to actually do in order. 1. Run your VIN. NJETSA.gov/recalls, 17 digits free, and it takes less time than reading this sentence twice. Do not rely on a year and model list, mine included. These campaigns are cut by build date and plant, so 2 identical-looking Tahoes off the same lot can land on opposite sides of the line. 2. If you have an open recall, get it done, and before you leave, get the inspection result and the oil specification written on the repair order. Then photograph it. If your engine was replaced, ask on paper whether the replacement is new or remanufactured. None of these are aggressive questions. They're the questions of somebody who intends to still have the paperwork in 4 years. 3. Know your coverage by name. GM's is special coverage, N252494003. 10 years or 150,000 miles from the in-service date follows the vehicle, not you. Toyota's covers engine replacement free of charge with remedy timing that differs by campaign, so ask which campaign yours is in. Nissan's Rogue campaigns are R25 E2 and R25 E3. 4. Learn the 3 symptoms because on a bearing you have a window and it isn't long. A knock or heavy tick on a cold start that fades as it warms. A low rumble under load, merging, towing, up a grade. And the oil pressure light, which on this failure mode is not an early warning, it's a eulogy. Any new knock from the bottom of the engine means you stop driving it. Not drive it gently to the dealer. Stop. A tow is $150. A rod through the block is the whole engine, and it moves you from a warranty conversation to an argument. 5. Here's a procedure rather than a rule, and it's the most useful thing in this video. Send an oil sample at your next 2 changes. One sample tells you almost nothing, you're looking for a trend, and specifically for copper, lid, and tin climbing together, which is the signature of a bearing overlay wearing through its layers in sequence. Copper alone can be an oil cooler. Iron alone is normal. All 3 rising in order is the bearing talking to you. Cut your old filter open while you're at it and look at the pleats in good light. And the honest caveat. This is not a guarantee. Standard spectrometry can miss larger particles entirely, so a clean report is reassurance, not proof. 6. If you're shopping used, any 2019 through 2024 GM 6.2, any 2022 through 2024 Tundra or Lexus LX, a 2024 GX, a 2016 through 2020 Honda or Acura V6, a 2023 through 2025 Rogue, run the VIN before you discuss price. Then ask 2 things. Was the recall completed and which remedy path did it get? If the recall is open and there are no service records, walk. Not negotiate. Walk. There are plenty of these on the market and the good ones come with paperwork. That's it. Go run the VIN tonight. Kitchen table, phone, 90 seconds. And by the time you go to bed, you'll know one of 3 things. You're clear, you've got work booked, or you're one of the people who's been driving around inside somebody else's cost-saving decision without being told. Any of the 3 is better than not knowing, and the 3rd one is worth real money to you now that you can name it. Now comments. I already know who's showing up because they showed up under every article I read while researching this. They're going to do the math. 36 failures out of 600,000, that's 0.006% better than average, quit complaining. So let's have it out properly and bring your denominator. Because 36 was the January figure in one specific audit of post-repair failures, the letter in February listed 139, the separate engineering analysis counts over 1,100 bearing failure reports. And the manufacturer itself acknowledged more than 28,000 field complaints before any of that started. If you can build a defensible failure rate out of those numbers, post it, show your work, and I'll pin it. I mean that. Nobody in public has one, including me, and I'd love to be corrected by somebody who does. And if you'd rather just tell me what yours sounds like on a cold morning, where you are, what it is, how many miles, whether the dealer passed it or replaced it, do that instead. Those comments are the ones I actually learn from, and I read a lot more of them than I ever managed to answer. One thread I deliberately left alone today. The lifters. Same GM V8s, entirely separate failure, entirely separate cause, and I keep tripping over it every time I go looking for something else. I haven't sat down and done it properly yet, and I'm going to. If that's the kind of thing you want turning up in your feed, you know where the button is. Until then, check the VIN, keep the paperwork, and if it knocks, don't drive it.